Good morning.
Good morning.
The discussion and the testimony on whether the Bush administration was guilty of perpetrating torture was already obvious, was already self-explained by Abu Ghraib and many of the Army investigations themselves. One of them having indicated that Don Rumsfeld, the head of the Defense Department, was keeping himself up to date directly, talking to the famous General Jeffrey Miller from Guantanamo about the progress of various torture techniques in breaking one of the so-called high-value prisoners. Since then, since that testimony, we've had the incredible spectacle of the head of the CIA going with the Vice President of the United States down to beat down the door of Senator McCain and plead for an exception. It's not working.
You're having trouble hearing. How's that?
Maybe I should change that better. Okay, thanks, Jeff. The incredible spectacle of the head of the CIA and the Vice President of the United States going out to plead with with Senator McCain to give an exception. From. Okay, that's good. That's good. An exception from the amendment that Senator McCain had drafted and that had wide support, like 90 out of 100 senators. We had that. We had the signing statement that when the McCain amendment was finally passed, the President saw fit to add a signing statement which said, "None of the above shall be construed as impinging upon my duties as Commander-in-Chief." Missing words, to do whatever I want, irrespective of the laws of the United States. And then finally, we have the President bragging about the effects of torture in his speech exactly a week ago. Even the bragging is a pack of lies. It's being reconstructed now, what he's saying about people like al-Qaeda and others. This little cops and robbers rendition that he did a week ago is not only fatuous, it's inaccurate. So, what about Nuremberg? What about a war of aggression? I think it's worth repeating the Nuremberg finding. To initiate a war of aggression is the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only insofar as it contains the accumulated evils of the whole. Accumulated evils? Think torture, folks. Think torture, think kidnapping, think keeping people in black holes without telling their families, or the Red Cross. Think of those things. Now, I happen to be an analyst, and so I've been giving a lot of thought to how it could possibly be that our country had established an official policy of torturing folks. And the answer, of course, is that after 9/11, how many times have you heard this? After 9/11, everything changed. Right, okay. What does that mean? Well, that means that 9/11 made it possible for this administration to play on the trauma we all felt, to play so cynically on the trauma suffered by the American people, to start a war of aggression on a country that had nothing to do with 9/11. And now we have the Republican-dominated Senate Intelligence Committee saying precisely that Iraq had nothing to do with al-Qaeda. Now, one of the things that really cries out here, for an analyst at least, is to reconstruct exactly how it happened. Now, we all celebrated, if that's the correct word, the 5th anniversary of 9/11 just the other day, okay, just 2 days ago. Fox News didn't carry what else happened during 9/11, but Richard Clarke did in his book. And he pointed out that right after the President of the United States issued his little speech to the nation, he convened a small meeting with Richard Clarke, Donald Rumsfeld, and a couple of others. And this, according to Clarke, who, as I say, was there, is what was discussed. Someone made the point that, it's sort of illegal under international law to go after countries that, didn't have anything to do with aggression against you. And the President is quoted as saying, "I don't care what the international lawyers say, we're going to kick some ass." Now, sometimes these things have bizarre ramifications. And I see folks here from Camp Casey in Crawford, Texas, and they may remember that the counter demonstrators had one sign that they seemed to feature, and on it was stated, "Kick their ass and take their gas." And folks, there is encapsulated the whole essence of this war and of the means used to prosecute it. So, what happened then? Well, the president set the tone. And so when I hear about rotten apples, folks realize that the rotten apples were at the top of the barrel, not at the bottom of the barrel, and the foul ooze that came out of those rotten apples fouled the whole barrel. That's what happened. We have Cofer Black's testimony. Now, great name, huh? Cofer Black. Who was he? He was the head of the counterterrorism part of the Central Intelligence Agency and the intelligence community. And he testified before Congress that there was a before 9/11 and there's an after 9/11. And after 9/11, the gloves were off. Cofer Black went over to the State Department to serve as counterterrorism chief there, but he retired very soon thereafter, and now he's vice president of Blackwater. Vice president of Blackwater. Surprise, surprise. Well, so what happened? What about these gloves being off? Well, I wasn't there, I wasn't in the Oval Office, but I know how these things work. And what happened was the president said to Cofer Black and George Tenet, the head of the CIA at the time, "You have some guys that can do this? You still have some guys that can, you know, take their gloves off and make it happen?" And so Tenet went back to the agency and found, yeah, he had about 9 guys left over from Vietnam, left over from special forces who kind of were willing to do this thing. But when we went to the president, he said, "Now, of course, Mr. President, they'd like you to sign this finding, which will allow this." And it was then that the president said, "Alberto, where's it? Alberto, come here." Get his lawyer right away, okay? "Alberto, can I sign this?" And Alberto blanches and says, "Well, I'll get back to you in a few hours." What happens next is Alberto Gonzalez goes to David Addington. Who knows who David Addington is? He's the vice president's lawyer. David Addington says, "No problem." Drafts up a memorandum in a couple of days, and on January 25th, 2002, there's this famous memorandum drafted by Addington, signed by Gonzalez, that tells the president a couple of things. Geneva, that's quaint, that's obsolete, okay? So you can exempt whole classes of people like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban from the Geneva protections, no sweat. But Mr. President, there's also U.S. criminal law, and we've looked at that, and it has pretty serious penalties, like somebody dies under torture, it's death. It's called the War Crimes Act. It was actually drafted and passed by the Republican-dominated Congress in 1996. And so that's something we need to tell you about that, but, quote, "There's a reasonable basis in law," end quote, "where you, Mr. President, can escape subsequent prosecution if some ill-intentioned special prosecutor should be appointed to move against you after you leave office. There's a reasonable basis in law that you can escape prosecution." Now, that sound like a mafia lawyer to you? Well, that's the way it sounds to me. And on the strength of that, the President of the United States, on the 7th of February 2002, signed a memorandum, an order, to all his chief aides in the national security apparatus, saying, "We will treat prisoners, quote, humanely as appropriate and as consistent with military necessity," end quote, period. That is the loophole through which Don Rumsfeld, George Tenet, and the others drove the Mack truck of officially sanctioned torture, folks, and that is a crime under international as well as national law. Now, just a word about torture itself. You know, you can take a utilitarian approach to torture and say, well, you know, it works, and you have all these cockamamie stories about the one guy who we know knows where the nuclear weapon is in Penn Station, that kind of thing. None of that thing holds any water. Even the head of Army intelligence, on the same day that our president was bragging about the good effects of torture, apparently the head of Army intelligence decided he would tell the truth. And what he said was this, and I quote, "No good intelligence is going to come from abusive practices." I think history tells us that. I think the empirical evidence of the last 5 years, hard years, tells us that. That's the utilitarian argument. But folks, the reason that there is international as well as national law against torture, this is not what makes torture wrong. Torture is not wrong because it's illegal. It's illegal because it's just damn wrong. I'll just say one final thing here. And does torture work? It doesn't, as I've already suggested, and it's wrong. But it can be made to work. Let me give you an example. The president wanted to deceive our elected representatives in the Congress out of their constitutional prerogative to declare or authorize war. He needed evidence. He needed to prove that Iraq was tied up with Al-Qaeda. There was no evidence. The CIA, to its credit, hung tough on that one. And the Senate committee has since showed that to be the case. But he wanted some evidence, and guess what? A fellow named, a detainee, what we call him, named Alibi, was captured, and he was fairly high up in Al-Qaeda. And he was given to the Egyptian intelligence service. And guess what? He confessed that Iraq was training Al-Qaeda with chemical weapons, with explosives of all kinds, and other terrible weapons, okay? And the president, on October the 7th, 2002, told that to the country in a major speech. That was October 7th. He also said that the first sign we may have that Saddam Hussein has a nuclear weapon could come in the form of a mushroom cloud. October 8th, Victoria Clark from the Pentagon, mushroom cloud. October 9th, Condoleezza Rice, mushroom cloud. October 10th and 11th, your representatives, senators, and mine voted for a war that was totally unnecessary. So, what has Alibi said since? He's completely disavowed his confession. He said he was tortured by the Egyptian service and made to say that because it was very clear that that's what he wanted him to say. So, from the president's point of view, from Rumsfeld's point of view, hey, you know, it can work. It's that cynical. So I think we have to stand up for our values, talk about values. If we can't get together and rally our fellow citizens and to say torture is beyond the pale, we all should agree on that. Why the churches are sort of hanging back on this, I'll never understand. But we have to go to our churches and everybody else and say, look, this one is clearly a violation. This is a war crime. This is a crime against humanity. Thank you.